He had won the League One title, scored important goals in Europe, and established himself as one of the most frightening young attackers in world football. And suddenly, the biggest clubs in Europe wanted him. His first season in Paris was spectacular. Mbappe scored 21 goals in all competitions and helped PSG win Ligue 1, the Coupe de France and the Coupe de la Ligue. He was no longer merely a young player being protected by experienced stars. He was becoming one of the stars himself. And then came the summer of 2018. That summer changed everything. The FIFA World Cup was being held in Russia. France had a talented squad, but nobody knew exactly how far they could go. Mbappe was only 19. He had never played in a World Cup before, but instead of looking overwhelmed by the biggest tournament in football, he looked like he belonged there. France progressed through the tournament, and then came Argentina. On June 30th, 2018, France faced Argentina in the round of 16. That match became the world's introduction to Mbappe on the biggest stage. He was devastating. His pace caused Argentina enormous problems. He won a penalty. He scored twice. France defeated Argentina 4-3. And suddenly, the entire football world was talking about the teenager from France. He was 19 years old, but he was playing with the confidence of a veteran. France eventually reached the final against Croatia, and on July 15, 2018, history was made. France defeated Croatia 4-2. Kylian Mbappe scored in the final. He became only the second teenager to score in a World Cup final after Pelé. Mbappe finished the tournament with 4 goals and was awarded the FIFA World Cup Best Young Player award. At 19 years old, Kylian Mbappe had already accomplished something most footballers can only dream about. He was a World Cup winner, but instead of slowing down, he accelerated. The 2018-19 season saw him become even more dangerous. He scored 39 goals for PSG in all competitions. His speed had become terrifying. His finishing was improving. His movement was becoming more intelligent, and defenders were beginning to realize that giving him even a small amount of space could be disastrous. In 2019-20, PSG once again won Ligue 1. Mbappe scored 30 league goals and finished as the division's top scorer. On August 14, 2024, Real Madrid faced Atlanta in the UEFA Super Cup. Mbappe scored. It was the perfect beginning. A debut, a goal, a trophy. Real Madrid won 2-0. For a moment, everything looked perfect. Goals started coming. Mbappe continued climbing the Real Madrid scoring charts. By the time Kylian Mbappe reached his mid-20s, something remarkable had already happened. He had stopped being a young footballer chasing greatness. He had become one of the faces of football itself. Millions knew his name. Millions watched him play. Children copied his celebration. Defenders feared his speed. And football fans around the world had begun asking the biggest question of all. Could Kylian Mbappe become one of the greatest footballers in history? It is a question that would have sounded almost ridiculous when the little boy from Bondi first started kicking a football. But now it was unavoidable, because Mbappe had already achieved things that most professional footballers could never dream of. He had won the World Cup. He had scored in a World Cup final. He had scored a hat-trick in another World Cup final. He had won domestic titles. He had become one of the most prolific goal scorers of his generation. And eventually, he had joined Real Madrid, the club he had dreamed about as a child. But greatness in football is never measured by talent alone. It is measured by longevity, consistency, trophies, records, and what a player does when the pressure becomes unbearable. Mbappe had already experienced both sides of football. He had experienced the highest possible glory, and he had experienced heartbreaking disappointment. Perhaps nowhere was that clearer than with France. In 2018, he was the fearless teenager. 4 years later, he was the leader of the attack. And in the 2022 World Cup final, he produced one of the greatest individual performances ever seen in a World Cup final. 3 goals, a hat-trick, and still, France lost. It was cruel, but it also revealed something about Mbappe. He could carry enormous responsibility. He could perform when the entire world was watching, and he could respond when his team needed him most. That World Cup final also intensified the comparisons between Mbappe and Lionel Messi. Messi had finally won the World Cup. Mbappe had scored 3 goals against him. 4 years, football had been searching for the player who would eventually inherit the throne from Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo. And Mbappe was one of the obvious candidates. But the comparisons were never completely straightforward. Cristiano Ronaldo built his legend through extraordinary longevity, physical transformation, relentless goal scoring, and success in multiple leagues. Messi built his through breathtaking creativity, dribbling, playmaking, goal scoring, and an extraordinary connection with the ball. Mbappe is different. His greatest weapons are devastating acceleration, explosive movement, direct attacking and elite finishing. He can destroy a defense in seconds. Give him space and he can turn a harmless-looking attack into a goal before defenders have time to react. And that speed has become one of the defining images of his career. But there is much more to Mbappe than running fast. As he matured, his finishing improved. His movement became more intelligent. His ability to combine with teammates developed. And his understanding of when to attack space became increasingly sophisticated. He was no longer simply the boy who outran defenders. He was becoming a complete attacking player. But there has always been another side to the Mbappe story. The controversy. Success on his scale comes with enormous attention, and almost every decision he makes becomes public. His contract negotiations with PSG became one of football's biggest dramas. His decision to remain in Paris in 2022 disappointed Real Madrid supporters who had expected him to join. His eventual move to Madrid revived the old dream, but also created new pressure. His enormous influence at PSG led to debates about whether modern footballers have become too powerful. Some critics believed Mbappe had been given too much control. Others argued that a player of his importance had every right to make decisions about his career. Then there were questions surrounding his personality. Some saw confidence. Others saw arrogance. Some saw leadership. Others saw a young superstar carrying too much power too early. But perhaps that is one of the unavoidable consequences of becoming famous at such a young age. Mbappe was not given the luxury of growing up privately. The world watched him develop. At 17, he was a sensation. At 19, he was a World Cup winner. At 23, he was one of the most powerful footballers in the world. And by his mid-20s, he had already experienced levels of fame that most people never encounter in an entire lifetime. Every word mattered. Every decision was analyzed. Every bad match became a crisis. Every goal became evidence that he was destined for greatness. That kind of pressure can destroy young athletes. Mbappe continued. And perhaps his greatest strength was his mentality. He never seemed frightened by enormous expectation. If anything, he appeared to embrace them. That mentality was visible from his earliest days. At Monaco, he played without fear. At the 2018 World Cup, he played without fear. At the 2022 World Cup final, even after France had fallen behind, he continued fighting. And when the opportunity came, he took it. That is why his career is so fascinating. Mbappe has never simply been a talented footballer. He has always looked like someone who believes he belongs among the very best. But now comes the hardest part. Legacy. Because one day, the goals will stop. The boots will be hung up, the stadiums will become memories, and historians will ask, where does Kylian Mbappe rank among the greatest? Will he be remembered as one of the greatest French footballers ever? Almost certainly. Will he be remembered as one of the greatest forwards of his generation? Absolutely. But can he enter the conversation with Messi, Ronaldo, Pelé, Maradona, and the other names that have defined football history? That requires more. It requires years. It requires trophies. It requires unforgettable Champions League nights. It requires moments that become part of football's mythology. And most importantly, it requires longevity. Mbappe still has time. That is perhaps the most frightening part of his story. The footballer we have already watched accomplish so much is still writing his career. His story with Real Madrid is still developing. His international career is still continuing. There are still major tournaments ahead. There are still records within reach. There are still trophies to win.